This is Stereoactive Presents. I'm your host, Jeremiah McVay, and in this episode, I'm joined by Charles Hinshaw to discuss the latest and most likely final installment in the Indiana Jones series. Directed by James Mangold, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny stars Harrison Ford, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, Antonio Banderas, John Rhys-Davies, Toby Jones, Boyd Holbrook, Ethann Isidore, and Mads Mikkelsen. In just a moment, you'll hear my review of the film, followed by my discussion with Chuck. Back in 2005, I went to a midnight screening of Raiders of the Lost Ark at the Paris Theater in New York City. Karen Allen was there and talked about a fourth Indiana Jones movie that was finally about to happen, and she'd heard that Natalie Portman was in talks to play the daughter of Indy and Marion. A few years later, the movie she seemed to describe was out, but with Shia LaBeouf as their son instead of anyone as their daughter. And now we have a fifth movie in which Indy has a daughter figure. Perhaps this was a course correction to whatever developments Karen Allen spoke of, or perhaps not. Who knows? Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is more than capably directed by James Mangold. That said, Spielberg's absence is somehow felt throughout. After all, it seems a bit odd that a film that almost certainly will be the last in the series due to its star's age doesn't just, have the same director as the four that came before it. Harrison Ford is reasonably believable as an octogenarian action star, and the film does embrace his aging, but it's all kind of an odd choice for a character that, River Phoenix and young Indy aside, seemed in some ways ageless. In the end, it's hard to see this as a necessary installment in the franchise. From this point on, we may discuss elements of the plot that some would consider spoilers, so if you don't want to know anything about the movie, you may want to skip the rest of the episode, but we hope you'll come back and listen to it at some point. So, Chuck, I feel like I was sounding maybe a little harsher on the movie in that review than perhaps I actually was. Like, I found it entertaining enough, but not the same level as at least the first and the third in the series. What did you think?
I agree. I agree that it's odd that Spielberg's not involved as director. I don't know if he was producer. Maybe
he's executive producer.
Okay, so he didn't do it. As we know by the executive producer credit. And so yeah, I agree. I like James Mangold. For the most part, he's a little like a gun for hire at this point in his career, despite starting with such a really fresh movie like Copland. But it doesn't mean he's not fully capable and talented. Mm-hmm. But it is, Spielberg and his style was very much a part of what made Indiana Jones work.
Right.
So without that, it's a little flat. And my biggest concern was that there wasn't a lot of Indiana Jones stuff in it. When I think of Indiana Jones, I think of, cave dwelling and digging in the dirt and, that kind of stuff you get in Raiders, like in the opening scene in Raiders and all throughout Temple of Doom and the sort of there's a little bit of it, but not much of that sort of fine, kind of like scavenger hunty sort of thing that you got in Last Crusade. So I felt like I was missing that part. There is one sequence where they do go into a cave and do that stuff, but it's very short compared to a lot of the other sequences. I was very surprised at the length of the opening sequence. Yeah. I was like, damn, this is going on for a while. And
I am and I'm not. You know what I mean?
Well, that's the thing is, I don't know if I'm just getting older. I've seen too many movies, or this thing that Hollywood's doing just isn't working for me.
The de-aging?
Well, not the de-aging.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
The length.
Mm.
Like, movie's 2.5 hours long.
Right.
Does it need to be? You know, like, yeah, it's there's whole sections that were sort of unnecessary. And I feel like on the podcast of late, I've made comments about films' lengths
Yeah.
more so than I have in the past. And so I'm clearly like on this kick where I'm just like, I don't know if this needs to be this long.
Well, yeah. I mean, you're not the only one. I hear a lot of
Yeah.
people talk about that because I do think movies, especially like tentpole movies or supposedly tentpole movies, are longer than they used to be. Like,
Yeah.
it's rare you get a movie that comes in under 2 hours, like Barbie.
Right.
But sorry,
That
go
was
ahead.
one of my that was one of my favorite things about Barbie. It was how short it was. And just, going into a theater and being and I'm very sort of like, I get uncomfortable. Like, people can really annoy me in theaters for various reasons. And
Right.
so to only sit through 90 minutes to 2 hours of them being annoying versus like 2.5 to 3
Sure.
is one part of it. I want to share a moment. Kid sat behind me at this screening I went to of Indiana Jones, and he was with his dad. And part way about 15 minutes in, he goes, "Is that Indiana Jones?" And his dad says yes, and he's like, "Indiana Jones is good, right?" His dad's like, "Yes." And I'm like, what horrendous parenting is this? Where you just like take your kid to the Indiana Jones movie sight unseen, like no backstory, no let's watch at least the first one,
Right.
that whole thing. So, the youth is just deprived is really my takeaway.
Sure.
But yeah, I thought it was entertaining. I like seeing Harrison Ford. I felt like there were like multiple car chases because he couldn't run. So like they had to get
I
him
didn't
into
really think
cars
of it like that. That makes a lot of sense now, actually.
or like get him on a horse or something. Like they
Yeah.
had to get him in on some kind of conveyance because when he tried to run, he just looked old. And I thought the de-aging looked good if he didn't move.
Yeah.
It was like, because that first shot where they reveal him, I was like, wow, that's pretty good. But then he sort of starts moving and talking, and it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely better than Princess Leia in Rogue One or
Yep.
Peter Cushing in Rogue One.
Yep.
But I've
I think
heard
it's better
people.
than Irishman. It's better than
Yeah.
De Niro.
I don't know. For some reason, it didn't bother me as much in The Irishman. Maybe because they're not doing like action in that movie. But
Sure.
I've heard people refer to this as video game Indiana. Like the de-aged version of him at the beginning of the movie, and that makes a lot of sense to me. I do think like if you saw this in a video game, you'd be fucking amazed, but in a movie, it just feels like slightly unrealistic. Like there's something off about it, and
Yeah,
it didn't quite work for me.
for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I agree that I don't know that it was necessary, as it's kind of like this great character with these really iconic movies goes out with a bit of a whimper.
yeah,
And I mean, I like Phoebe Waller-Bridge. I thought she was really good. I liked her character sort of being this. It's just sort of Marion Ravenwood-esque, where she's can take care of her own and is kind of out for her own thing, but is
right,
also has a thing for Indy and has a history and an affection there.
right.
Antonio Banderas was in it.
Yeah, for some reason.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that would be the sequence that I would cut. Would
Yeah.
be the ocean.
Yeah, that was
sequence.
weird. That was a weird sequence, I have to say.
Yeah, it didn't really. It seemed like you could have gotten to where they were gonna go without that.
Mm-hmm.
And made it shorter.
Yeah.
But other than that, I mean, it was fine. I mean, I guess it was better than Crystal Skull. I watched the original 3,
Mm-hmm.
and then I watched about 20 minutes of Crystal Skull. And I didn't turn it off because I was like not into it. I just got busy, and then it was time to go see this one, and I was like, all right, fine.
Yeah.
But I do remember really feeling annoyed at Crystal Skull.
This time when you watch part of it, or when you
No,
watched
the
whole
first
thing?
time when I first, because I thought it was weird that they made about aliens.
Yeah.
And I was like, archaeology, I guess there's people who sort of, the aliens built the pyramids or whatever. But to me, it's more fun when it was about like, some other sort of mystical thing.
Yeah,
like
I know.
the Holy Grail.
Well,
Or-
we'll get to that in this movie too, maybe in a second.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess I actually rewatched the first probably 45 minutes to an hour of Crystal Skull.
Mhm.
And then yeah, it was like I just kind of didn't go back to it. And as I remember, it's like the stuff after where I stopped that was more annoying when I saw it
Mhm.
before. But that was a movie that I think in theaters I enjoyed it more than other people. I think I was just kind of high on like seeing Indiana Jones again.
Sure.
And then when I tried to watch it when it came out on like I don't know, probably DVD at that point. I was sort of like, what is this? What are we
Right.
doing here? And like the whole mutt thing never
Yeah.
really sat well with me. I was like, what is this? Like it's the entrance of Mutt looking like Marlon Brando
Yeah.
and I'm forgetting the name of that
The
movie.
Wild One.
Yeah, the Wild Ones. In the Wild Ones. Just I will never fathom why anyone thought that was a good idea. It's just so dumb.
Yeah,
But,
I think the whole like, remember how we made it super about the 40s in the first three? Now
Yeah.
we're gonna make it super about the 50s. That I thought was less interesting.
right,
It sort of seemed like overkill, like they were like trying too hard.
right.
Um,
Yeah. And I think the stuff that was in some ways most interesting about this one, like almost paradoxically for me, was like I did appreciate in a way how they were embracing Harrison Ford's age and not other than the opening scene.
Right.
And kind of playing with that, but it was just, it seemed more like it was obligatory rather than an exploration of it to some degree
Sure.
until the end when they really lean on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It was very jarring to have Indiana Jones in a movie where someone's listening to the Beatles for some reason. I was like, wow,
Right.
oh, I didn't even think about that. That's crazy.
Yeah.
But
I don't, the age thing, I agree that, they're nobody had a great idea about what it should be.
yeah,
They had to come up with something in order to make this movie.
right.
That's how it felt.
Yeah. It did feel like that.
Mhm.
And I do find it interesting, like having the two of us recently watched the latest Mission Impossible
Mhm.
and then watching this, the way that they approach their aging star, two of the last real stars of Hollywood. And for one, they both have like these car chases with these weird little cars.
Right.
These goofy little cars. So there's that.
Yeah.
Direct linkage, I guess. But then also just the fact that like Tom Cruise's Mission Impossible franchise has basically become about him as a metatextual thing, sort of being like, yeah, none of you guys can do what I do. None of you young guys can do what I do. Come at me. I will keep being the star of this thing.
Right.
And you will be the villain or my lackey at best. And it's about how none of you can do this, and once I'm gone, this is over. And then this is like a different spin on that, where it's like, oh, why am I still doing this?
Right. Well, Harrison Ford is that. I watched a video of him going through his career as like a Vanity Fair retrospective. Have you seen that?
I think I did, yeah.
And the comment that's synthesized it the best was like Harrison Ford being unimpressed with his own career for 20 minutes. And that was like what it was, because he would just be, they would ask like, what, Star Wars or Indiana Jones. He'd be like, so George called me and
Oh yeah, he's terrible at speaking. Like, yeah.
He's just not. I feel like the cruise like loves what he does and puts all this energy into it and is so like raw about that stuff. And Harrison Ford is very just like, yeah, we did a thing.
Yeah. Well, I think that's
And
the difference. I think Harrison Ford, by all accounts, loves what he does,
yes,
meaning making a movie. He
Right.
hates everything around making a movie. He
Right.
hates promoting a movie. He hates talking about movies. He hates being interviewed. All that shit.
Yeah.
The contrast, I think, too. I did see that whether it was Vanity Fair or GQ, they do like kind of similar things. I don't remember which it was, but I did see that. But the counterpoint to that maybe is him at Cannes.
Right.
Did you see that?
I saw some where he gets very emotional.
Yeah, he got super emotional when they presented him with some sort of like life achievement award, essentially, and it was very touching, I thought.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of am pro his attitude about things. I like the less flashy. I mean, I love Tom Cruise, but I love Tom Cruise like as a filmmaker, and I like his movies. I definitely feel sometimes when I watch him in interviews, I'm just like, all right, dude. But Harrison Ford, and I find it really interesting to see him be so like mellow and like, yeah, whatever about stuff, and then see him act.
Yeah.
And he's like very alive.
Exactly.
And really in it. And so, I mean, you know, I guess if it weren't for him, it's a weird thing to say, but like this movie means nothing without him. and there is a level of just getting to see him be Indiana Jones one more time that is kind of fun.
Yeah.
Even
and it
if
seems
it's
like
a little,
they acknowledge that this is going to be the last thing within the movie, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
But okay, let's talk about the end.
Okay.
I don't even know how I feel about it. Like
Are you talking about the time travel thing?
They travel through time and he meets Archimedes. And he wants to stay there because he's outgrown his usefulness in his own time, essentially. Outgrown his life or something.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what the fuck is happening here? Like, I don't know. I wasn't like necessarily totally against it, but I was just baffled more than anything.
I think it follows the Crystal Skull path of upping the ante to a point that like, I know it doesn't make sense that you open the Ark and then like ghosts fly out of it and kill everybody. Like, I know it doesn't make sense. I know it doesn't make sense that, you know, he drinks from the Holy Grail and like saves his dad and like, what are they, like eternally youthful now? Like, how does that work? I get it. But this is too far. You know, like,
why is it too far? I guess like that's what I can't quite put my finger on, because like that's the internal thing for me. I'm like, this seems like too much, but why is it too much? Why did those work and this didn't? And the Crystal,
because I think those were honestly, like, even though, you know, the Ark and even the I don't know what you want to call it, voodoo or whatever you want to call it in the Temple of Doom.
Yeah, that's a very confused movie culturally. It's
yes,
like voodoo in India or wherever they are.
Exactly. But you know, and like, you know, like they pull the heart out and the guy's still alive and all that stuff. But all of that is still grounded in this like mythology of humanity and the concept that archaeology and an archaeologist like Indiana Jones is into, which is that, you know, the ancient stuff is the most pure because it has power by being so ancient, and it rests, you know, in the ground, and we dig it up and we go into the past and all this stuff. Aliens and time travel don't fall into that category.
I buy this. That's a good one. I like it.
They're like not at all related to human history. or, I don't care if whatever weird alien conspiracy theory you have, it's not the same.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not on the same level as these other things. And those are also just like single, even though they try to do it like the skull and the dial, like the ark or the cup, they have like powers that shift, the world. Whereas the ark and the cup are like very to the moment that they're in.
Right.
And then you put it in a box, it goes away.
Yeah.
So I'm making this up as I say it, but
but this is making a lot of sense. You're doing very good with this.
Yeah. I think that's what it is. Because I'm with you where it's like, why is this fantastical thing like make more sense than this other fantastical?
Right.
But I think that's why.
No, I think you're right. Like, I mean, you could make the argument that, like, I don't know if there's a real dial of destiny. Is that a thing that, like, any version of that existed?
I have no clue.
Yeah. I mean, obviously not in the form of this movie, but like, I don't know that much about Archimedes,
I guess all those guys like Archimedes and, those ancient dudes, like they were just like making shit, right? They were just like coming up with, they were engineers in a way, right?
Right.
They were always coming up with things.
But yeah, I mean, I even if some version of a dial of destiny existed, something that looked like a dial that Archimedes made,
Mm-hmm.
I do think the difference, as you're kind of like pointing to, is that this movie makes it be something that he couldn't have made.
Right. Well, it's otherworldly.
It's otherworldly. It's other timely or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Because he's pulling technology from the future to make a thing. Whereas, like, yeah, the Ark and the Grail have this like mythos around them,
right?
Because of what they are, not what they're adding on for the movie.
And I mean, it does. It aligns. I mean, it maybe to the consternation of some, but there is that like Judeo-Christian sort of thing that it lines up with, and I don't know, that makes a little bit more sense than aliens or time travel.
Yeah, but I mean, I think they could have like picked something from another major religion and gone with that. I think you're right that there's something about it being like an actual human object, even if they're imbuing it with magical powers. It's magical powers. It's not technology from other world or other time.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's the thing. Yeah.
I think it is. I think you're onto something.
We solved it. Now, had they listened to us before they made this, they might have gone a different direction.
Yeah. I mean, there's probably someone out there who has watched every episode of the old Young Indy series or whatever it's called. I watched some of that when it was on back in the 90s and loved it as a kid
too.
And I read the Young Indy books.
Yeah.
I bet someone out there who has all that cataloged and memorized or whatever could tell us like, well, they did this kind of stuff in that all the time.
Right.
That's not the point. The movies are a thing that exist on their own. Those things are peripheral. I'm sorry.
No, they are. Yeah, for sure. And the movies tap into something. I think that's and the other thing is the movies were based on film serial.
Yeah.
And that's what they did in the film serial. Was they, rode horses and gotten, like not through the subway.
Right.
They were adventure stories about ancient things.
Yeah.
Not, this kind of hyper almost science fiction.
Yeah. I do think that's another reason that it doesn't make sense for Indiana Jones to exist in the 50s and 60s.
Right.
Because the serials don't really, I mean, maybe they go into the 50s a ways, but
a little bit, but not
by 1969, I don't think so.
No, certainly not.
So
yeah,
he's not only out of time, he's out of like his genre or format
right
at that point,
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. So I thought it was weird. I thought the whole thing was really weird. He goes in time, and then I swear there's some other movie where someone does the same thing. Like they go back in time and they're like, I'm going to stay here.
Oh, I'm sure there's more than one.
Yeah. It just, and I couldn't remember what it was, but it had that feeling of like, I've been here before. Yeah. And this doesn't feel right. And then I didn't believe that she, like, not taking anything away from Phoebe Waller-Bridge, but I didn't totally believe that she could just knock him out with one punch, and that he would awaken like the next 2-3 days later or whatever. She really had to like wallop him for that.
Is that what it was? I've forgotten now. Like she knocked him out and he's out for that long.
He's out
No,
for
he'd
a
also
while.
been shot, hadn't he? That's what it was.
He was shot?
Yeah, he'd been shot.
Okay.
And so she might have knocked him out, but like he was out for so long because he'd been shot.
Okay. Maybe that makes sense. I mean,
But
they still had to like drag his ass into that plane and figure out the dial and all that stuff. It was, of all the things, these are the things. It is weird with movies where I encounter this with, I wish I could remember what the movie was where someone was like, with Mission Impossible, a friend of mine recently was like, I was so bored watching Mission Impossible. And, they're like riding through Italy in a car chase. And it just seems so unrealistic. And then in the next breath, they were like, but I watched half of Lord of the Rings and I loved it. And there is something weird about movies where you're just willing to suspend your disbelief only to a degree. Right. And then it just starts to feel.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's something to be said for like, you can suspend your disbelief for an imaginary world, but when a movie ostensibly takes place in the world you live in, even though it's really not, but
right.
That's what Mission Impossible would have you believe. Then I can kind of understand. I don't agree with it, but I kind of understand.
Well, you're really eliminating like most action movies from your
Well,
from your
they don't like them.
repertoire. Yeah. Gotta love other movies,
Yeah. Well, any final thoughts about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny?
I love Harrison Ford. I want him to do more stuff, not necessarily this, but he's one of those guys. I don't know. I've been like getting morose and thinking about Clint Eastwood dying recently and how sad that's going to be for me. And he's another one. Harrison Ford's another one who it's like, when he's gone, that's going to suck.
Well, I mean, he's about to be in some Marvel stuff. And
right.
They I bet I wouldn't. I don't know. He could probably. I'm gonna forget what I was gonna say. I was gonna say they could probably just keep having him in movies even after he's dead at this point. That's for Marvel. But if anybody could be like, you don't own my likeness in perpetuity,
right?
For your AI bullshit, it would be.
I'd love to see him do one more like Witness or something.
Yeah, do a drama.
Do like a thriller drama like Witness or Frantic, whatever, like all these one-word titles.
Yeah.
And because instead of just hopping on franchises, which I'm sure is lucrative and he probably enjoys it. And I guess Shrinking is funny. I didn't watch it, but
I haven't seen it either. Yeah.
But I'd love to see him do like at least one more of those kind of movies because he's so good in those. And,
Same.
So that's my final thought about this movie is I'd love to see a different movie with him in it.
Hey, fair enough.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Chuck.
No problem.
Thank you for listening to Stereoactive Presents, and thank you to our guest, Charles Hinshaw. The music in this podcast is composed by Hansdale Sue. My name is Jeremiah Lee McVay. If you like what you hear in the show, please rate and review it in Good Pods, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that allows that. Doing so helps us to expand our audience, and it's much appreciated. And please follow us wherever you happen to listen to podcasts. Every little bit helps, and like I said, it is truly appreciated. You can also get in touch with us at stereoactivemedia@gmail.com, and you can find more information about this show and everything else that Stereoactive Media is involved with at stereoactivemedia.com.
This podcast is produced by Stereoactive Media.